Guild. It's me, Josh. I'm wearing my orange shirt. I've got my glasses on my hat. Go Kansas City.
I don't get it. You started this.
So you wonder if you
somewhere along Harley by rolling them right down, making sure that the
Welcome to the Scale Builders Guild and thanks for watching. I'm Matt, your tattooed, witty Canadian host, here to tell myself to begin the introduction. So it's week 8 of the Axial Honcho budget build-off. If you're not familiar, what we're doing is we're upgrading the Axial Trail Honcho with $50 every week. We've done tail lights, axle shafts, bumpers, tires, and a bunch of other things. But every week, we're just upgrading it a little bit more. Since we started with my best impersonation of the Scale Builders Guild, this week I decided to play around with some styrene. I'm gonna go with a less expensive week to try and save a little bit of money for some of the upgrades that I've got planned coming in the next few weeks. My goal for this week was to scratch build my own fuel cell to replace the Lexan version that was molded into this rear bed cover. Now, we had discussed before, underneath that Lexan one, it was just kind of a wide open space. We had kind of hit it with our new side covers that we did, but you could still see through there if you were looking. And I wanted to put a new fuel cell in there, something that looked much more appropriate. Up to this point, I've used 3D printing several times. This week, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to show that even I could do some scratch building. I've got very little experience with styrene at all, but I dove in this week and played around a little bit, and I'm fairly happy with the results. I did decide to draw my own templates so that I could plan out exactly how I wanted my fuel cell to be. So I dove into CAD and drew up the template so I knew exactly what size my fuel cell was going to be. You could do that just as easily with notebook paper if you wanted to. Now, since I went through the trouble of creating these templates, I'm gonna post them as a PDF onto my website with a link below in the description so that if you wanted to try to build the same shape, size fuel cell, you can do that just as easily. And since I've done all the design work already, I'll post a 3D printable solid of it as well in case that you do have access to a 3D printer and you would like to 3D print one of your own. I've already created my fuel cell, but I'm going to show you how I used these templates. If you've never worked with styrene, Matt from the Scale Builders Guild has an awesome 20-minute long video showing you basically everything you need to know to get started, and I'll link that above. The first thing we're going to do is cut out the templates. Once the templates are roughly cut down, we're going to trim them down to the exact size. Some of these pieces you do need 2 of, so printing 2 copies of the template may make things easier for you. Otherwise, you'll just need to keep the templates intact while you're cutting out the pieces of styrene. Be careful not to cut your fingers unless you're in Canada and have free healthcare. There's a couple methods to transfer your patterns onto your styrene. One is to lay the pattern on top of the styrene and then trace around the edges with a pencil. The other method I've used on some of the parts that are more solid like this is to come in and just cut out the center of the part. Once the center's been cut out, I'll use a piece of blue painter's tape. Then I can take and place this template onto my styrene and leave the template in place while I cut around it. And then I use a couple of different methods for actually cutting the piece out. The first is just to score the polystyrenes with the X-Acto knife and then break it on that line. The other method I've used is this sliding cutter. I've had this for a really long time and it was pretty inexpensive, but it gives you a really nice straight score. And then it gives me the ability to do that same score and break. So now with the top and that lower lip cut out, I'm going to apply some cement to both and then get them pressed together and start those 2 pieces bonding together. I'll apply some weight to the parts to let them bond together, and I'll move on to trimming some of my other parts. For the two side pieces, I've got the template made up so that you actually just use one piece and then score these pieces to get the bends that you need. There's two score lines, but one of them has to be on the inside and one of them's on the outside. So make sure that you make one score line and then flip the parts and then make the second score line. On the original template sheet, there's a template to show you exactly how much these pieces need to be bent. Once you have the pieces bent, you can apply some cement to the edge of the front part and one side of one of the other sides. At this point, just keep gluing the seams and working your way around the box. Once the initial box is glued up, I've got another bottle of cement here, and I've actually just taken and shaved a bunch of these polystyrene flakes, and I poured it in it, and I left it there overnight. From there, what I've done is gone around and just kind of gone along all of the seams just to kind of help fill those in so that when I sand it, I get a nice smooth edge. On the original paper template, I showed a bunch of holes around the outside. I've used that template as a drill guide to drill a bunch of these holes with just a small drill bit. And then later on, what I'll do is I'll go back in and just put in some 080 hardware or whatever hardware size you have around. I think the smaller the better as far as scale looks goes. So now I'm just pressing in the lower portion of the fuel cell into that top portion. And now I can add some cement around the edges to bond the two pieces together. So at this point, we've got our entire fuel cell all glued up and it's in one piece. Now, what we really have to do at this point is let this cure overnight at least. But once the glue is set, you can come in here and just start filing and sanding all of these edges to make everything blend and roll in together. But once these pieces are all sanded and smooth, you won't even see any of these joints. They'll just flow together and it'll look like one solid piece. That is one thing that this actually does benefit over 3D printing, is that the surface finish is better and you can work with it a little bit more. Now granted, 3D printing you can smooth and fill and sand and do all that with as well. But styrene does have its own look and you don't have to purchase much equipment to really get around to working with this. The other benefit is that you don't have to be exact right away. You just get it together and then you can work from there. Sanding, cutting, filling, you can add more pieces back in if you want to change or have a gap that isn't satisfactory. You can really just do whatever you would like. Now, as far as installing this fuel cell into the Honcho, what I did is I just came in and cut around where the red sticker met the actual Lexan of the Honcho. Once I had this piece removed, I sat the fuel cell down in there, checked if I needed to trim any additional. I needed to trim a little bit more around the outside of each side. And then one thing I did is I also cut all the way down into the very center of the bed. This fuel cell did not go all the way down. It kind of stopped halfway. I went ahead and just cut it the rest of the way down so that it didn't have an odd looking diamond plate piece in there. Now I added some aluminum strapping to the top and front of my fuel cell. A real fuel cell kind of mounts in this fashion. It uses straps across the top that bolt in through the cap and then bolt into a bracket below it. You can use the exact same template that we used to cut the top to make those aluminum straps. I also made the centerpiece of there out of that same aluminum. This is 0.025 thick aluminum. It's one of my favorite materials to work with. I think it looks really good and it's really easy to work with very light hand tools. The hardware that I've got around the outside is some hardware that I had around here. It's 080 by 1/8, I believe, and it is just something that I felt was a good fit for in there. Now, I did not use a nut on the bottom of any of these pieces. So when I placed each of these screws into there, I put a little bit of CA glue on each individual one as I placed them in there. Getting to this point of building the fuel cell was much longer than the actual finishing of it. The sanding, finishing, painting, and adding the hardware didn't take all that long. I didn't prime it. All I did was shot it with some red Tamiya paint. With the body lifted up, you can get a better idea of how this new fuel cell kind of fills in all of those gaps, makes this look much more realistic and much more appropriate to be put inside of that Honcho body. So as far as the budget goes this week, I put a very small amount of money into buying some products at the hobby shop this week. So I'll throw that in the budget. And then I'm also going to replace that stock plastic servo horn with a new Vanquish clamping servo horn for that stock servo. That stock servo isn't going to live in there for long. I'm going to be purchasing a new servo, but I just want to go ahead and get the servo horn purchase out of the way for now so that I know exactly how much money I've got in the budget and I don't have to think about the extra little details. Hopefully seeing that even I can work with styrene will make some of you want to give it a shot. I am as far from an experienced styrene worker as it gets. It's something I've played with only a couple of times, but I figured that this would be an easy project to start with. And overall, I'm actually pretty happy with it. I'm very rarely happy with things like that I build from scratch, but this week I think that it turned out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it, and I'll make sure to get those templates hosted on my website for any of you guys who want to try this project as well. So that's all I'm going to cover for week 8. Go make sure to check out the real Matt over at Scale Builders Guild for his week 8. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next Wednesday for week 9 of the Axial Honcho budget build. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.